The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Kia ora and welcome to episode 2 of The Fold. I'm your host Duncan Grieve, and this is the first episode of 2020, a brand new decade. I'm pumped about it. The Fold is a podcast about the media in New Zealand, kind of looking around here and out at the world because they're unavoidably, inextricably linked now. In episode 2, I spoke to Hal Crawford, who is the departing head of news for Newshub. Just to give you a bit of a background on him, he grew up in Perth. He cadeted at the West Australian, which is the big broadsheet, at least historically, broadsheet newspaper out there. Moved to Sydney to work on 9MSN, which was at the time, might still be, the biggest news site in Australia. But it's sort of one of those paradox things where it's a portal. So a lot of people see it almost by default. It was sort of proudly tabloid. So it was the biggest news site, but not necessarily the most prominent or talked about. While he was there, he got really obsessed with Facebook, which was sort of then new and shiny, and we didn't know what it was going to be. But he noticed that a lot of traffic was coming from there, and he got really fascinated with that and with trying to learn what lessons it contained. Ended up writing a book about it called All Your Friends Like This, which I recommend. It's co-authored with a few people, but Hal's parts of it are, I think, the best. Then he took that huge job at Newshub, which went from a big digital newsroom to a bigger multi-channel newsroom dominated by television, dominated by the 3 News newsroom as it was then known, which is one of the biggest, best, scrappiest, most courageous newsrooms in the country. One I've always admired. One which does not take any shit, and so, to be an outsider, an Australian walking into that room, you've got to be pretty brave. And he came in at probably the lowest or most freaked out time of its history. They'd just lost, they'd just been through Save Campbell Live. They'd just lost Hilary Barry. They'd lost the vast bulk of their investigative journalists. This was peak Paul Henry era. It was just after Mark Weldon had resigned in a blaze of hellfire. It was a wild, wild time. They'd been going backwards in the ratings, which he'll talk about for 5 straight years in the key news and current affairs slots, and so it was part of his job to arrest that. He created the Newshub brand. He did a whole lot, and now, like quite a number of key MediaWorks executives, he's leaving in part because the channel is for sale. We don't get into that because it's commercially sensitive and he's privy to things that he can't talk about. So we don't talk about the sale, but we do talk about a whole lot of other stuff. We talk about the whole Save Campbell Live thing. We talk about the 2017 election. We talk about Paul Henry. We talk about Mark Weldon. We talk about ratings, which I think I just barely discussed here, but obviously drive the biggest media brands in the country. And we talk a lot about Facebook, the way it's evolved, and just a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe, I feel like that's making it sound boring. It's not boring. I don't think it's boring at all. Hal is one of my best friends in the industry, one of the people I most like talking to. He's a very thoughtful guy, very clever dude. He's a loss to New Zealand, but I don't think he will be lost to New Zealand. I get the feeling he'll come and go a bit in some capacity. If I had to bet, I'd say he'll end up working for one of the tech companies because they hire smart ex-news people who leave our industry because their one pays better. Anyway, it's a good time. Have a listen. So, welcome to Hal Crawford, head of News Hub.
That's right.
For how much longer?
3 weeks.
3 weeks, and then you wrap it all up. Tell me about your last New Zealand summer, because you're like a New Zealandophile. Like you get up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday and go kayaking, and you like New Zealand more than almost all New Zealanders. Is my impression.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So what am I talking about?
You're just explaining how you spent your last summer here.
Oh man. Well, actually, for a large part of it, I was packing and cleaning, which is actually can become quite an interesting sort of thing.
You have cause to reassess your choices.
Well, yeah, you start to hate the things that you have.
What do you hate most? What was the thing that really killed you?
Well, the barbecue was I thought the barbecue was Mount Everest, but then I had to clean the car, and the car was insane.
Because you got young kids, right? So they really.
Oh, but we already gave it the Royal Clean Deluxe thing at the professionals, and then I went in and was completely disgusted by the job that the professionals had done, and I was basically pulling the car apart and finding things that I found spider webs. So spider webs, old lollies, about half of piha in the bottom, black sand, and I just went really deep. And I literally got underneath the car with my high-pressure water sprayer. And, I became obsessed with cleaning the car. It may tell you something about me.
I was about to say, that.
I got out tweezers to get out dog hairs. Yeah. Yeah, try cleaning a car with tweezers.
This feels like you were working through some stuff.
It was incredible. I felt like I could write a chapter of that book about cleaning. But anyway, it's kind of a rabbit hole. It's kind of a sidetrack.
And is that let's use that as an opportunity to segue into the car that was the 3 newsroom.
Oh right, okay. And
as you found it,
right? Okay.
when you walked in the door, was that your phone? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's actually Anvin, and Anvin is the finance guy in the newsroom, and he is so important to me. Do
you want to take it later?
No,
we do that.
No. I just wanted to tell you how important
So he's allowed to break through.
You've got to have friends in finance, and the guy in finance is he's like your wingman.
Yeah.
If you're the head of news, the guy in finance he's looking after you.
Because you've got a lot of unanticipated expenses.
Oh my God. Like the Australian bushfires just recently.
Yeah.
It's $2,000 a day for the stringer. Plus, I know, $2,000 a day.
They must be, are they really good or?
Well, that's a lot of money.
Can you send over one of your kids?
Well, we did that.
Cute little kids now.
Stop it. Don't belittle them.
I'm not belittling them. It's just
okay.
there was a big generation that went through and then suddenly they were flying the plane,
Yeah. That just means you're getting older.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
So anyway, it's very expensive. We didn't know those fires were going to happen. We're covering them for 2 weeks solid.
And it's the biggest story in the world, and it happens to be right next to us.
Yeah. And, it was a great story. Loved it. I'm not having any pretense in this podcast, by the way.
Well, do a declaration, because I think it is useful to know the way
when I say great story, I'm not going to pretend to be sentimental about stories that are horrible for other people and terrible things that happen, because that's our job. And it's just disrespectful to whoever you're talking to and our audience to say, oh, look, it was a terrible thing that happened and I was really sad.
That's a permanent invisible disclaimer in front of all news.
Right. And it's like, well, it was a great story. So I'm just saying I'm not going to do
the fake sentimentality.
I'm not doing
You're not really into
I'm not doing that,
are you?
No.
Okay. So you drop in.
Oh yeah. So where did we leave?
You
leave
left Australia and you landed in the 3 Newsroom. I'm going to try and keep you.
Oh yeah.
Keep you going.
Okay. So first day, walking to work. I was staying in Airbnb or something like that.
Yeah.
And I got lost on the way. I got lost somewhere in the Domain, and I was walking around in my suit in the mud and trees, and it looked like it was going to rain. And I was so nervous. Because I had to walk in. You know, I knew the whole history of the newsroom. I knew about Mark Weldon. He'd given me the job, and then he'd gone before I got there. So my only contact with the newsroom had disappeared, the guy who gave me the job. I knew I was walking into a newsroom, which I felt somewhat unqualified to run. I knew it was a bigger newsroom than I'd run before. And it was a TV-based newsroom, and TV is not my thing. So, yeah, I was really hyped. I was hyped. And also New Zealand coffee is strong. It's strong. It can give you the jitters. Especially, you know, if you're coming from Australia, you're like, I might have a couple of coffees. But here, if you have a couple of coffees, like you've had 4 shots at least.
Yeah.
So that's just something. So it's something to watch out for if you're coming from Australia to New Zealand. I don't know how I'm going to go back the other way though. So, I wanted to talk about being a New Zealander-phile, Kiwi-ophile, whatever you want to call it.
Let's quickly do that and then we'll get back.
Yeah, because I wanted to wax lyrical about how amazing this place is, and just the sheer beauty, the kindness of the people, the openness of the people. And I know everyone here is like picking holes in everyone, all that, because that's your job. That's fine. But if you just wanted to get real for half a second, just enjoy it, love it, go out as much as you can, because every time I get outside of Auckland, I'm just amazed at how cool everything is. And there's decent coffee, and there's nice food, and there's beautiful vistas. And just an amazing place.
Yeah, and he's not bullshitting, by the way. As you can tell, like by the fact that he was like calling the bushfires a great story, this is someone who's moving back to the bushfires. So when he says that he thinks New Zealand's a great place, he really means it. Just for you listening at home. So you walk in.
I'm not trying to make you feel good about yourself.
No, I don't think you've ever tried to do that with anyone, as far as I'm aware. So you walk into this newsroom, different medium, much bigger, muddy. It sounds like. And sweaty, and really like just humming off the coffee.
Yeah.
What did you find?
I found people who were willing to give me a go. So there definitely was a lot of standing, because, you know, I came in there, Flower Street, that's the address of the MediaWorks newsroom. I came in there, people surrounded me in a circle, as I expected they would. Somewhat, you know, reticent, you know, not hostile, but, you know, I'd say addressing a newsroom is generally quite difficult, because you don't get anything off the audience. So you get nothing. They're passive. They listen, they soak it up like blotting paper, but it doesn't bounce off them. And if you want to have a contrast to that, go into a sales department. And I just love addressing sales. It is like, I mean, people are hooping and hollering before you're finished. And it's like, wow, that's so awesome what you guys are doing. So you don't get any of that from a newsroom. What you get is people sitting back and actually evaluating everything that you are saying.
That's horrible.
It is horrible, because you've done it, right? Once you start talking to a group of people, it is like you're on a luge. You're not changing course. You are icy. You're down an icy slope. You better have started at the right spot, because you've got no control. And that's what I felt like. I was down an icy luge. I think the luge that I had chosen for that first address to the newsroom was pretty good. I'd carefully thought about what I wanted to say. I wanted to reassure them that I wasn't going to be a barbarian and destroy their culture. I wanted to reassure them that I was a news person, that I love stories. And I wanted to let them know that I was going to listen to what they had to say. So, you know, the classic stuff that you should do when you go into a place where no one knows who you are.
So this is 2016, right?
Yeah.
And just an extraordinary time to start there, because this is one of the great news cultures, which we'll return to later. I know that's a particular obsession of yours, in New Zealand journalistic history, in that it's had this amazing group of people, and they've always been the sort of scrappy outsider, just tilting at the windmill that is TVNZ, and they've always been treasured by the organisation. They've always been its heart. That's certainly my impression from the outside. And then you have Weldon come in and say, news is like a nice to have almost. Reality TV is going to be the future. And look, he was right about that from a commercial perspective, I think, in some respects, but certainly his messaging was terrible. You had lost John Campbell just before you came in.
That's right, yeah.
And you'd lost
Hillary.
You'd lost the last of your sort of investigative, not the last actually, News Hub Nation stuck around, but the sort of primetime investigative stuff had gone. So you were walking into not just a big newsroom and not just a naturally skeptical newsroom, but a newsroom that had its heart ripped out, was incredibly traumatized, and had a private equity owner that it thought was going to sort of just try and smother it.
Some of the ideas that caused all of that upset, they weren't necessarily bad. The execution was absolutely appalling. And, it was naive. There was so much naivety. Like, I came in and I saw the report from the consultants that they'd employed to, it was classic. I mean, you only have to hang around 5 minutes in news to have seen one of these reports, and what they will say is that you've got to divorce the outputs from from production, and
What does that mean?
Yeah, so what it means is, like, if you're a consultant, you've got to come into an industry and have a smart idea about how to change it. So either it's one way and you flip it to the other side of the coin, or vice versa. In this case, we had specific groups of people making specific products, like we had people making TV, people making radio, and people making digital. Their idea was, let's make a general reporting pool, then we'll have smaller groups responsible for the outputs. And straight away, I just said that's a shocking idea because what you're going to have is the most powerful person in the newsroom, i.e. the head of that group of general reporting pool, not on the hook for an output. And we are going to die because the head of news, you know this, you run this spin-off. It's an illusion of control. The control is very much an illusion. And believe me, as a head of news, the control is very much an illusion. Your control is putting the right things in place, putting the right people, making the right structures, making the right calls so things naturally go the right way. And if you have the most important leader under you in the newsroom who controls most of the resources, not on the hook for ratings, traffic, listeners, you're screwed. So anyway, I chucked that out. That was a terrible idea, and then we got to the business of reforming the newsroom in the right way.
What was the right way, and how did they respond to that? Because newsrooms are, worldwide. Even if you haven't had it happen to you, you know what's been happening to other newsrooms around the world, and so there's a natural suspicion, like any kind of reform you assume is like a code for redundancy, that they're going to try and fuck you somehow.
Yeah.
So they resist using whatever tools they have to hand.
Yeah.
Did you find that?
I think people naturally resist. In my tenure, I was fortunately able to avoid any wide-scale redundancy. And again, I'm not bullshitting when I say fortunate. I was just lucky. And I also fought incredibly hard for resources for news within the company. And that fight involves external, like you've got to get the ratings, you've got to make a noise, you've got to be important, you've got to break the stories that people are talking about, and it's also internal. Like, if you can't show the other executives in the business why news is important, then you are not doing your job. So that's been a very important part of it, and I've come to realise. You said at the beginning, news was at the heart of MediaWorks, and it is absolutely at the basis of what of that MediaWorks TV business. It's there. It is the live content that fuels the TV schedule in particular.
While you were there, do you feel like, whether by accident or design or the slow attrition of money strangulation, that changed at all? Like that its centrality?
No. The newsroom, the MediaWorks newsroom, the News Hub newsroom is very expensive to run. And even though we were always the scrappy outsider, it was only in comparison to a well-funded, government-owned TV company.
We'll get to that.
No, I mean, however you cut it, it costs a lot of money to run what we do. And one of the things I sort of eventually became quite sick of hearing was that we were the underdog, because I think it gave us a psychological let-out for, subpar performance at times. And, when you're spending multiple tens of millions of dollars running something, you should be able to do a pretty good show, which we were. And, we did some magnificent things and magnificent stories, which are still going to happen. An example was the 2017 election, which I absolutely adored. That's my favourite election ever in terms of coverage, and I've been through a few Australian ones. And one, because of what happened and the rise of Jacinda Ardern and just all that, and also just because of the way we covered it. And I just loved doing the live debates that Paddy Gower did with the leaders, and it's just a real sense of occasion, light. Paddy was absolutely hyped to within an inch of his life. I saw him in the change rooms beforehand. We did it out at the Vodafone thing. And, so there are changing rooms for the teams or whatever they are. And it was like, Hal, Paddy's ready to see you now. And so I came in, there was no one else around. It was like a scene from some kind of crazy movie. And it was Paddy alone in a white dressing room, and he was vibrating with energy. And I spoke to him, and I talked, and now I'm like, okay, so I just sort of reiterated a couple of things that we'd agreed on and settled him. I didn't settle him down; that was impossible. But and then after a while, he said, "Right, Hal, that's it. You can go."
There was I went to that debate out there, and it was because it's rare to I'd been to debates. I think maybe in the 2011 election, and there's like maybe 30 people there. This was like hundreds of people. It was stacked, and it, you could feel the heat of the moment. It doesn't happen very often in live television that you get that kind of intensity, and you had all the storylines piling on.
Yeah, there was a real feeling that night, wasn't there?
It was special.
Yeah. And when you do a debate, for the next time you organise your televised debate, always shoot it in the round. Always have audience all around the debaters, because then every shot you get is dynamic, and also they feel like they're in a pit, an arena.
Totally. Because that was out the back of the fiscal hole stuff. There was
That's right.
electricity.
That's
in the
right.
air.
That's right. Accusations were being hurled around. And,
that was a great election.
Yeah.
So, notwithstanding your point about, you can't have a multi, like an 8-figure budget and always lean on the underdog.
Yeah.
There has been a persistent complaint out of MediaWorks, particularly over the last year, about the sort of structural advantage that TVNZ has, which I don't know if I feel like listeners of this podcast probably know what it is, and feel free to kind of revisit that. But I guess almost zooming out a bit, like what did you immediately notice once you got to work about the difference in the Australian media and the New Zealand media? Including the structural stuff if you need to, but also just the other. Like, we don't have Murdoch here. That kind of stuff.
Well, I don't, as you say, everyone knows probably what I think about TVNZ, and not what I think about the organisation, what I think about the structure. And I think it actually took a while to dawn on me what the actual facts were about how that structure worked. And when I finally twigged, because I'm a bit slow to things sometimes, I was like, I'm like slow to anger, but, I'll stay angry for a while. So I kind of just am still quite angry about the way that the structure works, because it's crazy. Anyway,
Well, we lived with the structure for
Yeah.
a long time because
Yeah.
everyone was making money. And as long as
Yeah.
everyone's making money, you don't think too hard about the structure. And it's only when you start to lose it and sort of you feel the tension of that all
Yeah.
the time that, of course, you'd stay angry.
Yeah, and I guess I was angry because I could see that one of the outcomes of this, not the cause, but one of the outcomes of the situation would be the closure of the business that I had come to love and the redundancies of people who I also loved and respected, and the loss of the stories that won't be told. I don't think that's going to happen. I'll just put it on the record right now. I actually don't think that's a viable thing, that MediaWorks TV would be shut down. It just doesn't seem very likely. However, when I was looking through the possibilities and getting in the getting angry stage, that seemed to me quite a clear possibility. And I didn't like the fact that a government-owned entity was part of creating that market. The New Zealand media market, when I came into it, it's strange because on one hand, it's smaller and nicer, and it's nicer in that, like, I actually know Shane Curry, I know all of the, I like, Mark Stevens, I know the people who run the other businesses, and I actually like them. Sinead and all of these guys, Paul Thompson, they're all good people who would come up to me and say hello. I'd come up to them and say hello. That's not the case in Australia.
Wow.
Well, it might be for some people, but it's not the case for me. And I actually don't think it is the case in Australia.
So what do they do? How does that sort of, is that just an enmity? Is that like what drives that?
Yes, it's true enmity, not just let's pretend we hate each other. It's true enmity. It is like some of those guys have got feuds. Some of them just really don't respect each other. It is a more geographically diverse, so you might not ever have met these people. On the other hand, what I was amazed about was the pressure cooker of New Zealand media. And by that I mean, I walked into this newsroom that was in disarray and people were writing stories about us, in the Herald and you guys and stuff. And I wasn't really used to that.
But they have like almost a more developed media coverage market in Australia. Right?
Yeah. It was particular to my situation as well because people were interested in the company that I'd come to work for. But also within the company that I worked for, people paid attention to what other people were writing. And that was the real kicker. And to me, it was nonsensical because it's like, well, you're just handing your own peace of mind to someone else who happens to be your enemy on a plate. I'm like, who cares if the Herald writes an article about the fact that whatever Hillary's doing or whatever, stupid thing we've done that they're picking up on. It's like, so you're really going to let that worry you?
So but it felt like those stories rated. I mean, I can't speak for the Herald and so on, but it certainly felt like during the Weldon era, like whatever you publish, whatever kind of, and the newsroom was leaking like a sieve. Not so much after you got there, but certainly in that year beforehand. So you were getting these kind of, whereas the Australian media coverage feels like it's a sort of, it's not dispassionate, but it's like it seems to traffic in sort of gossip that is of interest to journalists but not non-journalists or non-media people, and in the business of it, because it is a viable business or sort of seems to present as such over there. Whereas here it was sort of personalities and the sort of culture of the organisation. It felt like it was of interest to not just the newsrooms but to the wider public.
Yeah. I mean, and I enjoyed reading it. When I objectively, and I would often have these discussions with other executives at MediaWorks, because they'd be outraged about the latest thing that was published, and I'd go, "Oh, I quite liked it," and because it's like, well, that's good piece. I like that's interesting. I particularly loved a piece about Paul Henry that was kind of slice of life. I can't remember who wrote it, whether it was Stuff or Herald.
Was it the Greg Bruce profile of him, the one that led to him resigning?
No, not that one. No. No, this was a different one. Anyway, it was just a really good piece of journalism because the guy had got Paul at the end of it. Like, never schedule an interview on a Friday with someone who's been doing the mornings the whole week. That's the first mistake.
Yeah.
And never let them drink and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, it was just a good piece of journalism, and it goes down. I'm not gonna roll around in it because it was, Paul was being indiscreet and foolish in what he was saying. But I liked it. It was a problem for me. Look, my life was a constant series of crises, and kind of that's what I had to get used to. I hadn't had that in my past jobs. I'd been a head of news for organisations that no one cared about, right? I mean, 9MSN in Australia was the biggest digital publisher, but no one cared. It wasn't one of the established players in that sense. I came to work for Nine, but I was working on the digital side. Before that, I'd worked in newspapers, education, all that sort of stuff. So I hadn't actually been in an organisation where people took a lot of notice about what happened internally. So that was something that I had to sort of deal with. And then there was it was pretty crazy. It was like crisis after crisis. One of the first things that happened to me was that Paul Henry, who I really like, to me, he's just a great guy. He told me that he wanted to leave. And that was just like, you cannot be serious.
What was Paul's role at the time? Was he doing
the Paul Henry Show,
which was the morning show?
Yeah, the morning show. So that was 2016. And what Paul and that show had done, and it was EP'd by Sarah Bristow, who's now going to be the head of news. But what Sarah and Paul had done is absolutely turn around breakfast TV. They had started winning. They basically doubled the ratings in the morning, and they just turned the momentum around. And breakfast TV has a really big impact on the rest of the TV schedule for strange reasons, which I don't fully understand, but does. So it might be as simple as people leaving their TV on that station. In any case, Paul had made this wonderful show. He'd done 2 years of it. Well, when he talked to me, 1.5 years, and he was done. He was like, "No, Hal, I'm exhausted and I'm done." And I just couldn't accept that. I could not accept that. It was like, "What are you telling me? That I'm just here, I'm new, and the first thing we're going to have to announce is that our biggest star, or
and you've
one
been
of our
losing
biggest stars."
your stars.
Right.
It's quite important to hold on to.
Yeah, I know. So I went
cupboard.
to crazy lengths, but it didn't work.
We're just going to take a quick break now and come back to keep talking about the saga that is Media Walks with Hal Crawford. The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to oOh!media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
All right, so I'm conscious that we I feel like we could talk about the dramas and the crises in the newsroom.
I think I might need to at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe now's not the time for that therapy.
The other thing I wanted to talk, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was a particular obsession of yours, which is news cultures, which I don't think is an expression I'd heard from anyone else until I heard it from you. But it's one of those things that when you're a journalist, you sort of intuitively understand. And furthermore, 3 has, I think, still one of the great, and I think the most just sort of dynamic news cultures in New Zealand. Do you want to explain what you mean by that and why you think it's so important? You're considering writing a book on it. Is that a true thing? Is that a thing we can announce?
Yeah, I started writing the other day, and it may not be a book about news cultures, but it will certainly mention them. Now, the thing about it, I started thinking about, you and I and others, we spend a long time talking about the future of our industry and how can we get the resourcing that we need to tell the stories that have to be told. And, one of the things, the other day we did it's actually several months ago, but you and I and others, we came together and we thought about the future of the industry, and New Zealand On Air was there and
Minister was there.
The minister was there. Now, the important thing that I was thinking about at that time, which I've continued to think about, was how useless spot funding is for news. So by spot fund, any sort of discrete little bit of money, and you're like, okay, let's go and give this to that to tell that story. Well, that's hopeless, and that's not going to create news cultures.
And spot funding describes precisely what New Zealand On Air doles out and what is effectively being considered as a potential sell for all that ails New Zealand news.
Yeah, so New Zealand On Air is a great way of setting up funding for certain things. And I actually really, having come from Australia, I really like it. It is not a good model at the moment for funding news because news cultures have to exist over time to exist at all. And the thing about news culture is you need to have colleagues in order to be able to tell stories, and you need to have a functioning news culture. The example that I think about is a sole person on social media, publishing on social media. If you wanted to tell uncomfortable truths about anyone in your local community, you would be psychologically unable to do so. Most people couldn't do it because they're too sensitive to what other people think of them. They need encouragement and support from colleagues, and they need some kind of financial legal protection, especially when you are talking. If you're bringing information to the public that other people don't want, you've got a target on you. If you're alone, it's just not going to happen. So once you've understood that very simple point, you understand why you need to have news cultures. And then the real question for us is, how do we create news cultures? Aside from a traditional newsroom, which we're kind of working out are too expensive to run in many circumstances.
Yeah, well, and that feels like the big kind of almost existential question for the news media, is that in the absence of the sort of strong longitudinal revenue streams that sustained us, with this sort of shrinking, evolving at best, revenue streams, and the kind of constant movable feast that is audience. We came from an era where there was print, there was television, there was radio. And once you had a thing, whether it was a newspaper or a radio frequency, a TV channel, you were just filling your holes. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Because I never really worked in it, but that's certainly, looking back, it seems relatively simple, you were space constrained and there were high barriers to entry, and audiences really didn't have a lot else to do with their attention.
There was a huge amount of complacency in that world, and therefore I don't mourn it. I know a lot of people do, but I started in 95, and believe me, things in 95 were hellish. No one was happy.
It's actually comforting to hear.
No one was happy. Everyone was miserable. Like, things were so much better in the past. The standards were slipping. In 95, there was this obscene thing about newspapers. They were like this fat. Everyone was really down about how fat the newspaper was. And, in retrospect, it was like that was the rivers of gold time. Newspaper revenues peaked, 2002 or something? Mm. So I had come into it just before the peak. And for all the world, I thought, oh, my God, things must be really bad. There are only 6 cadets in the cadet intake this year. they've only got 6 months to teach us shorthand. That's really terrible. Standards really poor. So that was the mentality when I went in. There was all sorts of complacency and dysfunction. I don't see why we should particularly mourn that world. Some of the craft, I know why people love it. I love it too. The style guide, the culture of, the unsentimental, story-based culture, I absolutely adore. But there's ways to continue that culture, I believe.
So, in the place of that sort of stable, profitable world has come the sort of chaos wrought by the internet. And even though before you said that the consultants' report of consolidating to a sort of combined newsroom with various kind of heads piloting that output, which to anyone who's worked in a newsroom and knows the specific skill sets, how rare it is that someone can file on all three cylinders, if you'll pardon the pun. Is farcical. But in a way, you did something like it with NewsHub. Like, explain what it was you were trying to achieve there, and give yourself a grade on its success.
So NewsHub was actually a really brilliant idea, and it wasn't my idea. I'd just like to call out Andy Brown, actually, who was head of marketing at the time that NewsHub launched, with others for getting that together. NewsHub works because you don't want a platform-specific sell. So, if you are, if you do have digital, radio, and TV assets, and you're publishing on all three, why not unite under a common news banner, and then you can sell across the three, and any marketing work you do in one works with the others, any team building you do in one works for the others, and it all goes to support the cause. One thing that I've come to understand is the importance of marketing for news, and NewsHub as a marketing vehicle is very efficient. It worked because it didn't have TV, online or radio in its name. It's got news in its name. And, the best number of brands is one. NewsHub is one brand. I would have liked to rationalise the AM show and other things into NewsHub. That was just constrained for practical reasons. But where possible, I NewsHubified everything. We brought in Nation, we called it NewsHub Nation. It's really simple, but names determine a lot of things, and names are important. So what NewsHub allowed us to do was sell cross-platform and talk about what we did as an unfragmented whole, and that was just brilliant.
You've touched on ratings a couple of times, which are this thing that people in television are obsessed with because it has a direct impact on revenue, but people outside of it, like, they're not even really published or discussed in New Zealand. What has happened to ratings in your time? Because it's from the figures I've seen, they have declined, especially in certain demographics, quite dramatically. But it's like this big thing that affects everyone that no one talks about. Yeah.
Don't they talk about it?
Well, they don't talk about them publicly.
Oh,
and
no.
They're not well understood outside of the smoky rooms.
Well, there's two ways of there's more than two, but there's two ways that we talk about ratings. We talk about share, and that is just the share of available audience, and that, of course, is a relative measure, and that's not going to go away over the time. That's not going to dwindle over time.
There's always 100 as the total number.
Right. And there's ratings, which is a much more absolute measure, and you can see what happens to it over time. So I care about 25-54, not 5 plus. 25-54 is what MediaWorks sells to, so that's what's important to us. For TVNZ, they may be more interested in 5 plus, although you can't sell anything to 5-year-olds, and once you're too old, it's you're not very fruitful either. Let's face it.
Apologies for too old listeners. to all listeners.
That's all right. I don't think anyone's trying to sell anything to me either. All right. So the thing about that is that people using television, that number is going down. So that's the existential challenge for that for the industry. People using television is just the absolute number of people who are tuning in. Ratings are going down. Where you might have had a lot of 10+ shows, you don't anymore. What's happened in news for my properties for 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. that is Newshub and the project, is that we had a period of steep decline. So I've just done the work because I'm sort of doing a handover document, which is a very fascinating document, which I can't give you.
You saw that look in my eye.
And so 10 years, 2009 to 2019, this is real big picture stuff.
Oh, man, I really want that
document. Well, I can describe this. I can describe the curve. So it is like this gets to 2015 and flattens, totally flat for our ratings for 6 p.m.
Because this is a podcast, I'm going to ask you to describe that.
Oh, yeah. I just made a shape in the air with my hand. Sorry, everyone. It's not a hockey stick. It's like, so it's just like a hill. It's a steep hill that's in 2009. It's going downhill. Then it hits 2015 and it's flat. So the toboggan ride is over at 2015. That's because of the launch of Newshub. It's also at 7 p.m. It's because of the launch of the project. So what we have done, believe me, do I look like a physical wreck? Because
I didn't want to say anything.
The effort that we have put in over the last 3.5 years is all about, flattening that line, because we were in free fall. Like, we were losing it. And now we've managed to flatten it at 6 p.m. and 7 p.m, and that is a major achievement.
So it's interesting, right? Because I feel like if you were to ask the impression that was given to the public during the St Campbell Live campaign was that this was a politically motivated or this was not because of ratings. I mean, Campbell Live was the 7 p.m. show.
Yeah.
That's the big change, because you've had an hour-long 6 p.m. news show throughout. You've lost Home and Away during 2010 to 15, which is often cited.
Don't talk to me about Home and Away.
Yeah.
It's an in-joke in the team I work in, which is you're not allowed to talk about Home and Away. Because,
I can imagine.
Because every time there's like, oh yeah, but then we lost Home and Away. And it's like this. It's this unstable.
Is it real? Like, what was it as big a loss as it is often held up to be?
Yeah, but take
lost.
some bloody responsibility for your life, for God's sake, and stop saying Home and Away. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Okay.
All right.
So, why was Campbell Live as big a loss? Were people watching it to the extent that they were? In an amount commensurate with the rage that greeted its eventual cancellation.
You mean, was it rating well?
Yeah.
It was rating well at the end.
Yeah, it was rating incredibly well at the end, but that was like a protest rating.
Right. There was an amazing spike, which to this day is an anomaly, which appears on the it's like it's like one of those blips in the climate record where an asteroid hit. So the asteroid hit and Campbell Live was cancelled. I think it was done poorly. I think it was. I mean, I shouldn't comment on that, but it was done poorly.
You mean the execution?
Right.
Yeah.
The execution of the execution.
Yeah. But it did need to be executed.
You know what? I'm not commenting because if I was here then, would have I shut the show and would. No, we would have had to. You had to do something.
That's what I'm asking.
You had to do something.
Is that you couldn't just keep rolling the old team out and hoping that the results would change?
What, are you insane?
No. Well, I hope not.
No.
I mean, I'm in the media business. So.
You got to. If you can't change your shows, you're not running a TV business. You are not running a TV business if you can't. Am I going to get angry about not being able to change my shows? Because I feel like I am. It's like. You have to be able to change your programming.
It's funny though, like you say that, but RNZ has had Morning Report and 9 to noon and, afternoons and,
Yeah.
and Checkpoint. Like,
Yeah.
that is a sort of a key difference between commercial and...
Maybe they've just weathered so many storms but they don't know.
Well, I mean, I also think that their audience reaction would make the Save Campbell Live campaign.
Yeah, what are their drivers? Their drivers are ass covering because, the worst thing that can happen is that you get in trouble if you work for a government-owned entity, right?
Well, especially a non-commercial one where your money just turns up.
But also they have a different reason for being.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to cancel some of their shows?
No, I don't. Well, not necessarily. It's not my job, but I do think it's, if you want to know what the difference is between commercial and non-commercial media, you can look at the schedules. So there was this tremendous effort to save this thing. You had Newshub launched. What is the sort of the single biggest thing you learned through all of that sort of chaos and pain and crisis to crisis and all of that?
Wow.
Big one, I know.
Yeah, that's a big one. It was very good because I think, like a lot of people, I'm naturally quite fearful, and I may not appear to be. And the sort of compilation of crises just made me a lot tougher, and making really difficult phone calls, disciplining people, trying to keep a cool head when things are getting nasty. All of that. I learned a huge amount through that period. And just, every weekend there would be something. Every weekend there'd be phone calls. Every weekend there'd be a story. And so that professionally I learned to just go with it and to deal with it's like when you're surfing and there's a big set comes through and you're just getting smashed and you just have to deal with every wave. So just dealing with every wave, that was a good lesson. But also, shall we get a bit existential?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We tend to.
Yeah. So, just that idea that, I personally had chosen everything. Just that I was there. I'm here. I'm in New Zealand. It might feel to me like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? Who's going to do something crazy? Who's going to get a job offer from someone else? Who's going to, what's going to happen to ratings? I just had to change for my own survival, I had to change my thinking. And it had to be that everything that is happening to me is my choice. And when I could adopt that way of thinking, then everything started to get better. And now I'm happy.
You're happy because you're not the fact of your leaving, is that related to your happiness?
I think it's partially related to my happiness.
Yeah. Do you know what you're doing yet?
Yeah, I'm doing nothing for at least a couple of months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know where I'm going to go and work.
But you're moving back to Sydney?
Yeah, I'm moving to Sydney. Yeah.
And let's just rewind a bit.
Yeah.
To before all this, because I want to talk about Facebook, but which I feel like you have thought about as much, if not more, than any media executive in New Zealand. In fact, you've written a book about it. Tell me about, which is called All Your Friends Like This, and you should buy it because it's actually very good. And the best stuff in it is written by Hal. He's a very good writer. What I want to know is, I guess, what your initial impressions of Facebook were and how they've evolved over time.
I was always pretty pro Facebook, and I on balance I still am. I'm also pro Google, so that makes me quite strange in the traditional media world. So Facebook was just another company. It's hard to take your mind back there, and they had a pretty rubbish interface. It was all sort of clunky and weird, and they just insane dedication to refining and improving that over time, and that's and that focus has obviously got them where they are. The first indication, I mean, it was pretty early when we started realising we were getting quite a bit of traffic from Facebook, and therefore they had a big role to play in the news industry.
This was at MSN?
Yeah. So this was at 9MSN. As I said before, we were a really big traffic sort of site, super tabloid. I learned all of my tabloid chops there. I've never lost that. Love a good headline. Insanely competitive. If you and I, had a traffic competition, then
you would clean house.
No, I wouldn't. I'm saying I would just become insanely competitive.
Yeah, but I would not be. Yeah, well, I have no shot at beating a good tabloid. But there is an art to it, which I think is underrated. Like people who, and you can tell when there's a new social media manager, someone who's got it. Right. I think like the Herald's cells lately have been outstanding, and the whole vibe of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I just came to appreciate that spark. It is by no. I don't want to glorify it. It's by no means the end of the game, and there are huge important things that we should be doing. Every opportunity I got at 9MSN, I tried to put money into original reporting, and I basically just used the traffic to try and subsidise that. So that was my agenda. Facebook was, again, for me, a way of trying to subsidise the agenda. And it was like, oh, we're getting amazing traffic from this thing. Let's maximise it. Let's find out what people share, because that's changing news. If people share dog stories, we never knew that before, we're going to do more dog stories. So that was changing us, and it became a loop. And that's what everyone saw. In fact, in that book that you mentioned, we wrote a chapter on hoax news, as we called it, and that became fake news, and fake news became quite a thing.
Totally prescient.
Quite a thing. I kind of wish that we'd followed that one up with a little bit more research, but at that time already, it was pretty obvious that it was going to be a major thing, and the basic reason was economic, which is that it's very, very cheap to make news that isn't true compared to, it's expensive to make news that is true, as you know.
Original news that is true is a phenomenally expensive commodity that cannot be funded.
It's just CPN. So damn expensive to ascertain facts. And it's like, oh, do I really have to make sure that that's true?
It feels true.
What a drag. What a drag. But you do, and that's the essence of the promise. And and if someone is competing on you on a completely equal field, except that their news, it doesn't have to be true and yours does, you're going to lose. So we kind of worked that out. Now, Facebook.
Do you think Facebook has a responsibility, or should have a responsibility, to be more kind of choosy about, create a better environment for the true news versus the not true news?
Just remember for a second about Facebook that they have evolved, and they have evolved from a company that was transparently providing a platform, and all they were was a carrier. They have changed, and internally probably their culture hasn't kept up with that change. They became world dominant. They dictated whole industries. They dictated the flavour of news. They dictated everything. They dictated the outcome of elections. And they just internally took a hell of a long time to catch up with that responsibility that comes with that. And they're still catching up to it.
Yeah, and you talk about how your newsroom felt like when they were being written about in these other, poxy little New Zealand news sites. Imagine being Facebook and realising that the installation of kind of inarguably the worst president of it, the last century.
Like hell. My belief is that internally at Facebook it's been like hell.
Yeah, but or do you think that they have just not believed it?
No, they're not insensitive. They're hyper aware of what people are writing about them.
It must be a very, very difficult thing but at the same time, I don't think that they don't. If it's been like hell, you'd expect there to be more emotion, more kind. You don't feel that externally to the extent that you would expect. And I certainly, when I talk to people at Facebook, and we have some mutual friends who work there, they seem acutely aware of it and troubled by it. They're very thoughtful people, but the sun god of Facebook.
Yeah. Don't forget, it's an engineering
it's
company.
an engineering company.
It's an engineering company.
And I think that's such a critical thing to understand, right?
Yeah.
The other thing to understand, and I don't know, this might be very well understood by listeners, is like a lot of people, who are in the media, they either have good news habits or they get their news from Twitter.
No one else does.
No one else does, right?
No.
What is the quantum difference between traffic from Facebook and Twitter for just people who are listening?
Twitter does not even register. It's like, it's like app traffic. Just quietly, I don't like apps.
Yeah.
Less than 1% of traffic, and same with Twitter. Yeah, forget it. It is not important. The only reason it's important is because your boss is questioning you about something that's been written about on Twitter.
So Twitter is basically a news input.
Yeah.
It's not really a news output.
It's a news input. It absolutely is a news input. One thing about Facebook, can I just bring up my favourite hobby horse about Facebook?
Please do.
Which is that they're sitting on a trove of information. And this is where I get mad. This is my favourite get mad with Facebook time. Yeah. The point is that they have the ability to understand humanity better than anyone ever before in the history of the world because of their trove of psychological and behavioural data. And that is not being used as it should be used to better understand ourselves.
It's just being used to sell you products.
Yeah, I don't care about that. That's fine.
Yeah. But they could do all this other stuff with it, but they're choosing not to.
What about, the stuff that they only just nibbled the edges of before everyone flamed them and just roasted them and killed them for understanding people a bit better? Like that whole emotional contagion thing, right? Right. Just a very small study that proved that you can catch emotions from the words that other people use. Imagine what else they could do. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I'm sure that they could tell when you're going to break up with your wife. I'm sure that they can tell when you're going to find new friends. Or I'm sure that they can tell.
They already know that you're pregnant before you do.
Right.
Right?
Isn't there, when you have that, isn't there some kind of responsibility to share that in some way with humanity?
Well, in some ways, the response that we gave to they figured out how to make you depressed and not make you depressed would have been so terrifying that
That's exactly right.
And to be honest, I think you're both right, but also if anyone is going to be given this godlike task of figuring out that data and then potentially deploying it, I don't trust them.
No. Well, I don't think it's a question of trust. I think...
But are they the appropriate people to hold that?
Yeah, well, the fact is that they do at the moment. So either we totally nationalise that data, which would obviously be quite a strange precedent.
And a problematic thing to do in a lot of places that don't have good democracies.
Yeah, look, I don't know what the answer is, but I do know I do know that the getting angry about them doing experiments and roasting them was not the way to go.
I think doing experiments is one thing, but certainly analysing the data in post in ways that are more have greater levels, greater aspirations than I would like to increase the efficiency with which I can sell.
Lame. That's so lame.
Do that because that's your business, but do some other stuff too.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I think they're cowed into just doing nothing but defending their position. They are in the most intense crouch right now.
Yeah. Well, every time they do something interesting, they get attacked. Anyway.
Yeah.
What else shall we talk about?
Well, let's go existential again. We actually don't have a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
In part because you don't know how to read my text and came very, very late. So the media business.
What I've made up for in quality.
Yeah.
What we don't have in quantity.
It's been really strong. Do you think there is a future in advertising-funded media?
Wow. Yes, I do. And the reason is that, so I've thought a lot about this actually, and about how, what we do is gather attention and then sell attention so that other people can sell their stuff. That's basically what we do. And if you thought there wasn't a kind of a future for advertising-funded content, then you would be suggesting that somehow the advertisers' needs are being met elsewhere. And I don't see that happening. And furthermore, it just turns out that this strange way of doing attention, buying attention and then using it to sell your product actually kind of works. And it's just weird that it does. It doesn't work to pay people to watch advertising. They've tried it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for advertisers to make their own content. Tried it. Doesn't work. I know. Believe me, it's over. Party's over.
He's absolutely wrong on that point, but we'll move on and defend our business model some other time.
Yeah.
What about? But I mean, I think all that can be true, but the most valuable and popular media brand in the world right now has no advertising on it, no intention, and I think that is a very underrated part of its popularity. Which? Netflix.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yep. That's.
There are two advertising-funded companies that are far more valuable, and both of them, one's about 600 billion, one's about $1 trillion. But they neither of them create any original content. They're not media. They are media companies, but they're also not media companies in the sense that they have no creative control over the media.
I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a necessary requirement of a content business to be funded by advertising, but do I think that advertising-funded content is going away? No, I don't. I think display advertising at the moment is a bloody hard game to be in.
Why would that change? Do you think that'll change? Because that's the predominant model of funding non-paid-for print products on the internet.
Non-paid-for print products on the internet. Yep, sure. It's going to be hard for a long time. There's an infinite supply. Infinite supply. It's just that, because I thought for a long time, okay, it's rooted, it's done. Display is done. But the thing is that advertisers need it. I know that's.
But that's not the same as meaning that it will ever exist at a high enough price to create original work.
Yeah, I mean it will exist. It's just that the current models are not quite right.
But you have faith, hopefully, that one day they'll improve the product, because the product is not.
The product's not great.
It's a bad product.
No, the product can be bad. But refinement over time. Exclusivity of some of that function. The model of, okay, you'll come to us and we'll create your advertising for you and we'll work with you to make bespoke. That's one thing that people are trying out, like yourself. That's one way to much higher value advertising. That's really important and that's totally valid. I just think that we have a current model of display at the moment, which is I should be able to just give you a copper plate, just a spot, and then that should be valuable to you. That's going away. I think borrowing attention off people for a fee, that's not going away.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we get attention from amazing content like what we're doing right now. Right?
That's true. Well, this is a very sophisticated podcast, incredible audience, and no sponsor yet. So, if you're listening,
wasted opportunity.
Huge wasted opportunity. Well, I really appreciate your coming up here, Hal. I've very much enjoyed talking with you over the past couple of years. I'd also like to think that even when you're in Australia, we could talk periodically, because
why not?
There's no good reason.
No, there is no good reason. And even if I can't come to these offices, actually, I think I will be able to, because as I said, I like it over here and I love fishing over here. So,
you think you'll make the trip back periodically?
Yeah, I think so. Also, I want to say to you, thank you very much, because it's again very special New Zealand media. I mean, I made a great friend and a colleague at an organisation that when I came, everyone's like, "Oh, Duncan Grieve, oh, watch out for him." oh, he's a bastard. He wrote some really nasty things about us.
They were onto it.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's give him a go. Let's see what he's really like. And you turned out okay.
I appreciate that, though. I think your colleagues probably had me pegged right, to be honest. Thank you so much, Hal, and good luck with whatever comes next. Enjoy the couple months off, and hopefully we'll see you back in New Zealand.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-off Podcast Network.